2 secondes, Pascal Prévost, ancien thésard d'Alain Berthoz, qui m'a... Oh, je ne sais plus. Oui, je crois qu'il y en a quelques-uns dans la salle ici. Juste un mot sur lui, ce qui m'a apporté, et c'est le reflet de ce qui se passe depuis 2 jours et surtout cet après-midi, c'est l'interdisciplinarité. Moi, je viens du monde du sport, pareil, en STAPS avec Michel-Ange Amorim. On est baigné là-dedans, mais je n'avais pas vu à l'époque, j'étais trop jeune, j'ai pris quelques années, l'importance de ces connexions entre différents domaines qui ne sont pas forcément les nôtres et qui pourtant les enrichissent mutuellement. Et je pense que toutes les interventions qu'on a vues depuis hier sont le reflet de ce que Alain m'a transmis, nous a transmis en tout cas à tous ces thésards. Et on va pouvoir continuer cet après-midi avec Guillaume Millet qui va nous parler de la longue durée, les courses de longue durée. Et on aura 2 autres intervenants. Thierry, je ne vois pas, il devait être par là. Non, il n'est pas arrivé. Sur donc 3 domaines complètement différents. Et donc je laisse directement Guillaume commencer par son sujet qui est l'endurance humaine.
Bien, bonjour tout le monde. J'ai la lourde tâche de commencer cet après-midi en pleine période postprandiale. Je vais essayer de vous maintenir éveillé. En plus, on va parler de fatigue, donc c'est le bon moment pour ça. Je voudrais remercier les organisateurs, Professeur Hublin et Berthoz, et puis aussi Vincent Nougier. Je crois que c'est lui qui m'a dénoncé. C'est la raison pour laquelle je suis présent parmi vous. Et je suis ravi d'être présent. C'était un peu 2 jours hors du temps, en dehors de nos thématiques habituelles. Donc, c'était vraiment une très chouette idée. Merci donc pour l'invitation. Et la commande qui m'a été faite, c'est de parler un petit peu de... Alors, ça a déjà été fait, hein, bien sûr, notamment par Daniel Lieberman, mais de durée. Et moi, je vais parler plus particulièrement de fatigue, donc le mouvement humain dans le temps. Donc, la fatigue induite par des efforts encore plus extrêmes que ce qui a été... évoqué jusque-là. Et je vais aussi, comme ce matin, par respect pour nos collègues qui ne parlent pas forcément français, je pense que la plupart d'entre vous comprenez l'anglais. Et si jamais ce n'était pas le cas, n'hésitez pas à revenir vers moi à la fin s'il y a des choses qui n'étaient pas claires. But I'm going to switch to English for the rest of my presentation. Okay, so this is a picture that I stole to Daniel Lieberman, and as he said, humans are poor sprinters, but good endurance athletes. The question is, so there is no doubt about it, the question is, actually I was discussing with Daniel at lunch, so what is the limit in terms of distance? So is it the marathon? Based on this picture, it's obvious that this is not exceptional. Hundreds of thousands of people are able to run the marathon, so this is obvious that this is longer than the marathon, and 1 step further than the marathon, this is the ultramarathon. So what are we talking about? It could be anything above the marathon, so it could be 50K and much higher, as I will show in a minute. And this is to answer one question I was asked yesterday. This is getting very popular. As you can see here, this is in North America, but this is the same in Europe and in Asia. There is more and more people and more new people who start running ultras. For various reasons, this is not the point. So when we talk about ultramarathon, it could be on road, on trail, and I've worked mainly on ultra trails. And this is a typical format for an ultramarathon on trails is 100 miles for historical reasons. And there are a couple of examples here of famous ultramarathons. So this one was actually last weekend, Western States in California. And people, so the first figure here is the winning time, and this is the maximum allotted time. So it's between 15 and 30 hours, and depending on the technicity and the amount of elevation, it could be up to 60 to 70 hours. And there are longer ultramarathons, such as the Tour des Géants in Italy. So you have the distance here and the denivellation. So you have to climb, so to run 330K and to climb 3 times the Mount Everest. And people are doing that in 65 hours up to 150 hours. And then you have even crazier races, such as this one. So this is in New York. And as you can see, this is almost 5,000 kilometers on a short loop. And for the winner, it takes a bit more than 40 days. And even so, this is not a race. I think that the limit of what a human being is able to do, I think this is the world record, actually, of the longest distance that a human being can run in 1 year. And this is a French runner, Serge Girard, who was able to run 27,000 kilometers, which is the equivalent of 640 marathon in 1 year. So this is, to me, this is the limit. As I said, my talk is about fatigue. So when we run those, I'm not talking, of course, about Serge Girard and the crazy races, but if you run ultras in general, so what are the consequences in terms of fatigue in particular? Of course, we have data on other physiological responses, but I'm going to focus mainly on fatigue and particularly neuromuscular fatigue. So the fatigue can be defined as a reduction actually in maximal force. So even so you are able to run, for instance, so even so you are able to run at a given speed, for instance, 50% of your max, whatever, if you measure maximal force on your quadriceps, you are going to observe a decrease in this maximal force, and this is the definition of fatigue, or at least the definition we will use in this talk. And this is different to exhaustion, to task failure. So you can be fatigued and still able to run. So this graph, which has been published, and now we have other points, but that fits more or less this curve, is each point is a study where they measure fatigue, so the reduction for the quadriceps maximal force after a race of different duration. And as you can see, you have a linear increase of fatigue, so the strength loss gets greater and greater up to a point, and then there is a plateau. And actually, it's not even so. Here we are talking about ultramarathon, so 36 hours. This is definitively ultra. 24 hours, this is also definitively ultra. Here, this is more like a classic endurance race. And actually, when we did a study on the Tour des Géants, so the 330K, which is much longer, because here we are talking about 120 hours for the average time of the subjects of this study. Actually, as you can see, the force reduction is only 25%. So not only there is a plateau in fatigue, but there is actually a decrease. So if we keep going here up to 120, we are going to have something like actually going down. So the conclusion of that is that it is less fatiguing to run 200 miles than 100 miles. So of course we see the limitation of this definition. The reason of that is that people, they cannot run the Tour des Géants without sleeping, at least most of the runners. So they sleep, they rest during the race, and that probably explains the lower force reduction. So this is very complicated, so I'm not going to detail every step. So this is the different reasons why you can get fatigue, why you can have this force reduction. It can be all the way from motor planning to force production at the cross-bridge level. And of course, we have several steps, and at each step, there is a potential reason why we are less strong, why we are fatigued. Okay? And because this is so complicated, usually what we do as exercise physiologists, we differentiate the central reasons and the peripheral reasons, and the limit being the neuromuscular junction. So anything above is central. It's not only the brain, it is the nervous system, and everything below is peripheral. So this is what is happening in the muscle. Okay? And of course, this is more complicated than that because you have peripheral inputs. So what happens at the periphery can have an impact at the central level. Okay? And how can we try to estimate which part is going on the brain, on the nervous system, and which part is going on the muscle? To do that, we use a very simple technique, which is the twitch interpolation. So what we do is we ask the subject to contract maximally their muscles. So we measure force here on the quadriceps, for instance, and when they reach their max, so this is maximal voluntary contraction, we superimpose an electrical stimulation to see if there is some reserve in the muscle that the nervous system is not able to recruit. And so we measure what we call the superimposed twitch, and we compare that to the same electrical stimulation induced on resting muscle, on relaxed muscle, And we have what we call the maximal voluntary activation. So usually people, they are like that. So when they are at rest, when you stimulate, there is nothing, or almost nothing happening. But when you are fatigued, this is a different story. I will show you an example in a minute. And so this is to detect the central fatigue, so the inability of the nervous system to contract the muscle. So the muscle is able to do more, but the brain doesn't allow him to do so. And then if you want to measure the muscle fatigue, you just examine the resting twitch. So for the same electrical stimulation on relaxed muscle, if there is a reduction in force, then it means that something happened at the muscle level. So this is how we differentiate central and peripheral. Anyway, so what we found is that, for instance, after the UTMB, so UTMB is one of those 100-mile race, a very famous race in France around the Mont Blanc. And this is a typical subject before, when you stimulate the femoral nerve, as you can see, nothing or not much happens. But after the race, this is a different story. So you can see the big superimposed twitch, meaning that the subject, of course, they have a reduction in force, but actually a very important part of this reduction is due to the inability of the nervous system to contract the muscle. And only part of it, and a smaller part of it, is due to what is happening at the muscle level. So what we found, and we did several studies in the ultramarathon, and basically we found that the decrease in maximal voluntary activation, so which is the definition of central fatigue, is around 20 to 30%, so which is a huge decrease, a huge central fatigue. So here, for instance, as you can see, for the knee extensors, there is a 20% reduction after the race, and then we also measured during recovery, and as you can see, it was immediately back to normal 2 days after the race. We didn't measure it 1 day after the race, but 2 days after the race, the central fatigue fully recovered. We still have a general feeling of fatigue for several weeks. So in terms of central fatigue, like this general, it's not the central fatigue as I just defined it as a reduction in voluntary activation, but we still have this when you run ultra, and because I know because I've done it, if you run ultra, you feel like you get sleepy and fatigued. So this is also central, but in terms of reduction of maximal voluntary activation, you get back. It's a huge decrease, but you get back very soon. And we did another study when we have people running 24 hours on a treadmill, and we found the same thing. We found a huge reduction in voluntary activation, so a huge central fatigue. And again, this is a complex slide to show that in terms of, okay, how can we explain that we have this huge reduction in voluntary activation, the fact that we are not able to drive our muscles optimally? It could be anything in the cortical spinal drive, at the motor neuron level, or it could be due to what we call afferent input, so all the feedback coming from the periphery that I was talking about earlier. So it could be different things, and indirect evidence suggests that maybe what is happening at the spindles could be part of the explanation in running. Another interesting, at least in my opinion, study, where we had the opportunity to do a similar type of experiment in this race. So this race is 100 miles, except that there is a version when you have, instead of doing it in one stage, you can do it in 4 stages, and you sleep between each stage. Okay? And what we found was quite interesting. So first, so in gray, this is the 1 stage, and in black, this is 4 stages. And as you can see, the black here, this is after the 4th stage. You can see that the voluntary activation, so the central fatigue, as we found earlier, there is a huge central fatigue that gets back very soon, as we found in the UTMB study, and much less central fatigue during the 4 stages. That was expected. But what was interesting is the muscle recovery. As you can see here, the muscle recovery, it took longer to recover after the 4 stages. So the ultra, we have a huge central fatigue, but in terms that recovers quickly. But actually, the recovery was faster during the ultramarathon than after the 4 stages, which seems counterintuitive, because you feel people get rest between stages, and still they took longer to recover. But if you think about it, it's not that abnormal, because actually, because they were able to rest, they run every stage much faster, particularly in downhill, meaning that they get probably, we don't have data, but probably greater muscle damage. Even so, they run the same distance, but it was run faster. So it explains why it took longer to recover at the muscle level when you are doing 4 stages, which seems like less extreme exercise, but the reality is that it's not only the distance that matters, this is also the intensity. And when you run long distances in one block, in one stage, you have this central regulation that force you to slow down, and this is what I'm going to discuss at the end of my talk. But before we do that, the second point, so first point, huge central fatigue. Second point, sex differences. So women are not that many running ultra, so you can see the percentage of women participation, and there is short distances, it's not that bad, but then as soon as you start increasing the distance, the women participation goes down. And anyway, so when we examine the fatigue, difference in terms of fatigue between men and women, we found, for instance, in that study here, published in 2015, that, so this is the different, I don't have time to detail, but this is basically the muscle fatigue here. So obviously male are in blue and female are in red. There is a greater peripheral muscle fatigue in males, and this is true for quadriceps, this is true also for plantar flexors. And so this was, sorry if I go back, this was done after a 110-kilometer race. So we found, okay, so this is interesting. So there is less fatigue in women. Let's see if we can reproduce that. And is it true only in very long distance, or is it also true in shorter distances? So we did another study at the UTMB where we were able to have female and men running 40K to 170K, so a huge range of distances. And what we found is that actually, whatever the distance, generally speaking, we got the same result, meaning that the women were less fatigued at the end of the race than the men. And so when we pulled all the distance, and you can see again that there is a lower force reduction in female as compared to males. And this is also what when we plot, so the same graph as I showed earlier, you plot so this is man, this is woman, you see that there is the same curve, but there is a shift down, meaning that there is less fatigue. So how can we explain that? There are probably different explanations, but one explanation is that, generally speaking, women have different muscle fiber types, so they have more type 1 fibers. So this is a study from Sandra Hunter, and as you can see here, whatever the muscle group, and this is the average of the different studies, the women have a greater proportion of type 1 fibers, which are fibers resistant to fatigue. And actually, this is a graph also from Sandra Hunter, and as you can see, we have this fiber type thing, but this is much more complex than just a muscle thing. We have the metabolism that is different, so more related probably to fiber type, so greater ability to oxidize fats. Vasodilatation is probably also greater in female, and because you have less peripheral fatigue, of course, there is a consequence due to the afferents that I was talking about. There are probably consequences also in terms of central fatigue, even so this is not exactly what we found, but at least this is what this graph suggests. So if you're interested, I don't have much time to discuss that, but if you're interested in sex differences in endurance running, you can read those 2 papers. Shoot me an email and I will send you the papers. So this one is a review in sports medicine, sex differences in endurance running, with some of my students and colleagues. And this one is actually, I don't have time. This is, personally, I feel that fascinating. In this paper, using big data, we were able to show that actually female not only have less fatigue, but they have a better endurance. So I mean the endurance in the physiological definition of endurance, meaning the ability to stay at a higher percentage of their max as the distance increases. Anyway, so I had to select topics, so I decided to not to focus on fatigue. Last point on sex differences is even though we are physiologists and we don't know much about psychology, we still try to investigate somehow with very simple method, just asking, okay, is there a possibility that women or men have a different approach to competition? And what we found in the ultra, so this is the short distance and the long distance, so the long was 100 kilometers and higher, the short was 40 to 60 kilometers, but globally this is the same result, even so this was not significant here, is that what we found is that the males reported being more competitively oriented than females, as you can see here. So yeah, maybe males stretch their limit deeper for different reasons. I personally don't believe this is true for elite athletes, but this is not a study on elite athletes. This is just common ultramarathon runners, men and women. So the reason I'm presenting those data is that what we found is that females were less fatigued. It doesn't mean that it's all due to the fact they are less fatigable. Maybe they are less fatigued. Part of it may be due to this psychological aspect, but we need further study to better investigate this aspect. Okay, and in the last 5, 6, 7 minutes that I still have, so this is not bad, unlike usual, I still have time to present the rest of my slides. I'm going to discuss one thing. So I've presented some fatigue data, neuromuscular fatigue data. Are those studies, are they really relevant to understand what ultramarathon runners, and actually I could say endurance runners, are doing in terms of performance and running strategies, etc.? In my opinion, it doesn't help, or it helps, but it's not direct. What I mean by that is, if I get back to my first slide, I said that, actually I didn't say it, but maybe you saw it yourself, that the force reduction, the plateau I was talking about, is about 40% reduction, which is huge. You are losing 40% of your maximal strength. So it's huge. At the same time, it means you still have 60% of your maximal strength. And with 60% of your maximal strength, you can run quite fast. You cannot sprint, of course. You have a reduced sprinting speed, but you can run quite fast, much faster than what ultramarathon runners are doing. At UTMB, the best runners, they are at 7 kilometers or 8 kilometers per hour, and the slowest, they are basically hiking. So definitively they could go faster. So there must be something else. And to try to better understand that, I published this flush model. Alors si vous parlez pas anglais, flush model, c'est la chasse d'eau. Okay? So this is the flush toilet model. Okay, of course this is to joke, but not only to joke. I hope it is not only a joke. Okay, so let me explain what this model is. So when you maintain a force, a low force, or a slow speed, this is the same. You have the same force or the same speed, and what you observe is that the perceived effort, so the feeling of effort, is going up. Okay, so this is true in lab studies. This is true in the 24-hour studies. Look at the first 8 hours. The speed was quite constant, and the rating of perceived exertion was going up. So definitively it works. It works. In this study, we didn't impose the speed. So the subject, they were able to choose the speed. So it was like a simulating race. And indeed, as in all races, the speed goes down. And it's interesting to see that they reduced the speed up to a point that they were able to, they reach a plateau in terms of rating a perceived exertion up to a limit. They feel that, okay, I can tolerate this level of perceived effort, this discomfort for the rest of the 24 hours that I have to run. Okay? And in practice, it's probably not linear, it's probably ups and downs, but the tendency is going up, definitively. And actually, this RPE, I think, is the key, rating of perceived exertion. And RPE in the flush model, this is actually the level of water in the tank. And you will understand why I chose this, the flush model and the tank here. So you know you have this sensor here. So basically RPE is the level of water. And of course, when you start, as I just said, when you start running, you increase the amount of water. So filling rate is the second part of the model, up to a point where you stop or you reduce the speed. And usually, I guess you agree with me, you don't die from running. You don't die from exhaustion. So there is something that stops you going too far. So we have what I call a security reserve, okay? And then, of course, when you rest, and with other strategies, you can decrease the level of water. So, of course, there is a valve. This is the principle of a flush toilet. Okay, so the point is we have this increased RPE, rating of perceived exertion. The question is why? So going back to some neuromuscular data, I said it cannot explain performance directly, but it can explain it indirectly. For instance, what we found is that we still have some, I said there is a huge central fatigue, but there is still some muscle fatigue. That is, for instance, shown here. We have also, again, I don't have much time to explain, but this H reflex is a way to evaluate what is going on at the spinal level, and there is a reduction of excitability. So at the end of the day, we have spinal inhibition, peripheral fatigue. So it means that if you want to run at the same speed, you have to increase the central drive because each muscle fiber is less strong. So they need help to run at the same speed, right? So this is what we call the feed-forward mechanisms, okay? And the reason it increases RPE is that there is probably a corollary discharge to sensory areas of the brain. Okay, so first mechanisms is what we call feed forward. And then we also have, at least this is my opinion, we also have feedback. So any nociceptive information contributes to this increase of perceived effort. It could be any muscle pain, articular joint pain, coming from tendon, even GI distress, even blister. So anything contribute to the fact that you are feeling worse, okay? And I believe that if we are talking about ultra trail, the feed-forward mechanisms are probably explaining why RPE increase mainly in uphills and flat course, and the feedback, especially what is going on at the muscle and the joint level, is probably mainly downhills. So any factors, so the model says you want to reach this security reserve as late as possible, okay? Because if you reach this security reserve, you have to stop or you have to reduce the speed, and you don't want that. And of course, the best way to do that is to train so that you get less increase of RPE because you get less muscle fatigue, you need the right nutrition so that you are not running empty, etc. But this is not it. The reason, again, I'm going to just take 2 examples to finish my talk, why this is, in my opinion, of course, a good model. First, sometimes you start the race with a tank that is not empty. And this is the case, for instance, here, this is not ultra, but this is, I think, the same applies, mental fatigue. Studies show that if you do a mental task, like you at rest and you do some cognitive task, and then you jump on the bike, you start with a greater, this is the black point here, black curve, you start with a greater perceived effort. Even so, you didn't do anything, just this mental task. And then, of course, then you start pedaling, RPE increases, and then, sorry, I go back, RPE increases up to the security reserve, up to the same level, and because you started higher, you go for a shorter distance, so the performance is affected. And it's not a physiological aspect. For instance, oxygen consumption is exactly the same, so it's only in the brain. So, of course, nobody will do math before doing an ultramarathon or cognitive task, but the same actually applies after sleep deprivation. So this is a study, another study that we did in 2013. So if you are sleep deprived, there is a decrease in performance. This is not due to central fatigue per se, not due to a decrease in voluntary activation. However, when you are sleep deprived, and we are not the first to show that, obviously, there is same thing. So if you are sleep deprived, you run at the same speed, you feel this is harder, and this is going to contribute. So you start with the tank that is not completely empty. So you better sleep well and even try to do the sleep banking strategy before running an ultra. I'm convinced about that. And then the second aspect of the model I want to focus on is the security reserve. It means that our brain protects ourselves against our own excesses. You want to do ultra, but at some points you also want to make sure that you're not dying from running ultra. And this is the security reserve. So what is the size of this security reserve? It depends. It depends if you are in a race, you are probably more motivated, so it's very related to motivation. Then if you can win money, you probably are going to reduce the security reserve, so you push more. And if your life is at risk, I'm sure you will find some resource to even further reduce the security reserve, right? Strangely enough, I've never found an ethics committee that allowed me to test this hypothesis. I don't know why. Anyway, so the size of the security reserve is a determining factor of performance. You want to minimize the security reserve. This is probably not good for your health, but this is good for performance because you want to push more. So it's the ability to hurt yourself. And sometimes you can go a bit too far. For instance, if you take drugs, if you take amphetamines, maybe you can cancel the security reserve and now you are really in danger. And maybe this is what happened to Tom Simpson, maybe. And same thing if you take painkillers, so you remove the information from the periphery and then maybe the security reserve is going so small that you are really in danger. And there are two, so our brain protects itself against our excess. There are, in addition of drugs, there are two exceptions: running in the heat, and the second exception is sleep deprivation. I don't have time to explain, but this is not scientific, but there is anecdotal evidence showing that, if you don't sleep, and here we are talking about severe sleep deprivation, the brain is so affected that you can put yourself in danger. But if you sleep, you're not running in the heat, and you don't take drugs, you have a brain that allows you to stay safe. So take-home message, human beings are great endurance athletes, particularly women. Running long distance induces large reduction in maximal central drive, but that recovers pretty quickly. Is it a protection mechanism? Maybe. And the last point is that central and peripheral fatigue cannot directly explain runners' behavior, so that we need a very complex flush toilet model. Thank you.